Today's Gemara and Beitzah Daf Yomi, all the learning for this month, the month of Tishrei. As we approach Yom Kippur, the Yom HaKadosh has been generously sponsored as a tremendous chos for Shleima Ben Yita, Mirza Hashem, we should have a complete recovery. As well, the rest of our Chalim, Shmuel, Yosef, and Yafreda, and Manning, Ben Vega, Chaim, and Sar, Shalom, Zim, and Reis, Zar, Baskenendi, to Basim, as Chayser, Yisrael, Ben Mendel, Eli, as a president of Yishalei, Shalom, as Naomi, Bashavik, Shevchan, Shmuel, Ben Tila, Dim, Chan, Rezel, Mikul Chaim, Basmin, Libra, Adinaina, Bashin, Mindas, Vim, Vegwer, Nechol, Shun, Zilur, Rivko, Bas, Bashav, Tel Zim, Nechol, Esther, Beisai, Shar, Chali, Yisrael, as well as Shedach, Yisrael, Chaim, and Devaira, and Shir, Miriam, Abbas, Rezel, Gittel. We're holding on the bottom of your Gimel and Beis, the two dots, 5 lines from the bottom. In Mirza Hashem, we're going to try to get up the shiurim around Yom Kippur time a little bit early, again, for all those who like to prepare and not to have to wait till after Yom Kippur and be behind, especially with Shabbos and then Sukkot. We're going to try to, Mirza Hashem, have everything up a little bit earlier. Says the Gemara, 5 lines from the bottom, you give them a piece. Ketzad Moilel. We had this discussion yesterday, a little bit of a fascinating discussion about Moilel Melilois, rubbing the ears of grain, and we explained that very primitively what's going on over here is you have an ear of grain, you have a stalk of wheat, and the way that you have a pod, a mustard seed, and the way to get to the inside is you rub the outside, and we kept it going like this, that you rub the outside and you get the seeds from the inside. But today the Gemara asks, what exactly is the process of moilel, of rubbing the ears, not your ears, bad joke, the ears of grain. You do it one finger against one finger, that's how you rub these ears of grain. One finger on 2 fingers. Rav Amar says, Rava, no. Kivan de Mishani, afilu chadai kulanami. Once you're employing a shino, he says, Rava, what's the shinoi that you're doing with one hand? Says Rav, you can even use all your fingers to rub it. You don't have to do 1 finger, 2 fingers, you can do the whole hand. That was part number 1, Moilel Melilos. Part number 2 was we said that after you rub them, what happens? You have the kernels, you have the chaff, you have to somehow separate it. Of course, in the Mishkan, this is the process of zoyrat, of winnowing. You would throw it in the air and the wind would take away all the chaff and everything would be great, which of course is forbidden biblically on Shabbos. But we said on Yontif, what are you allowed to do? We said you're allowed to do something with your hand. So now the Gemara asks, Keita menafeach, what is this process of menafeach, of fanning, that you're able to get rid of the chaff from the kernels? On the last line, you know what the process is? Menafeach, turning over to Yedalid Amar Aleph, Mekishrei Etzba'isa Bulamala. You fan from the knuckles and upwards with your fingers, but not with your palm. V'loi bekapai, the Tab Rashi says. Machulei Marava, they laugh, they smile, they ridicule this in the West. Why? Kivan de Meshani, like we saw a moment ago. Once you're doing a shina, you can do what you want. Because what's the reason of shina? Because normally you throw it from hand to hand, so you should be able to do however you want it. Elo Amar Rav Elazar. What's menafech? Menafech b'yadachas b'kol koichai. You're allowed to use one hand. You're allowed to fan it as much as you want, but kol koich with all your strength. And that is the process of moilel melilos. That is the process of menafech, to get rid of the husks from the shells from the grain from the part that you eat. Says the Gemara. Now we're going to continue our quest in the Malachas of Yontif. This is a tremendous framework leading us into the Yom Tovim. What other Malachas are you allowed to do in Yontif? Says the Mishnah. Beishamei Aimrim Tavlin, spices. Are you allowed to crush spices, which generally is the malach of teichen, of grinding? Says Beishama, you allowed to grind them ni teichen b'madach shalitz. You're allowed to use a wooden pestle. V'hamelach, when you're grinding salt, b'pach, you're allowed to use a earthenware vessel, u'be'eta parur, or with a wooden mixing spoon. Beis Hillel Aimrim, what does Beis Hillel say? Tavle ni teichen kidarkin. Spices, do what you want. B'madach shalavin, even with a stone grinder. Of course, it's the mortar and the pestle, the grinding guys. Says Beis Hillel, you're allowed to do what you want on the spices. V'hamelach, and salt b'madach shalit, with wooden grinder, wooden pestle. So again, without getting too detailed what exactly these items are, one thing is clear. Both Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel agree that when it comes to salt, you need more of a shinoi. As you see clearly in the words of Beis Hillel, that they said spices, do what you want. But salt, no. Salt, you still need a shinoi, whereas Beis Shammai said by spices you need a small shinoi, and by salt you need a large shinoi. Says the Gemara, holding in on that point that we just said, the Kulei Alma, everyone agrees, Mias Melech by Shinoi. Salt requires a Shinoi, a deviation from the norm. When you crush it on Yantiv, my time, asked the Gemara. Before we continue, I have to point out what type of salt. We're talking about salt that's mined in the current state. We're not talking about salt that started off large, you ground it down to something small, and now it's large again, because that would be a process of grinding after grinding, which is allowed. Here we're discussing salt that was mined in the current state, and now you want to crush it down. So says the Gemara, why is salt more problematic? That salt requires a larger shina, a larger deviation, than when it comes to the spices. Rav Huna, Rav Chisda, we have a debate. We don't know who is who, but we're going to have two opinions. Chadam one says, every dish needs salt, and therefore what? The Gemara doesn't speak out. But therefore, you should have done it before Yantif. And the fact that you didn't, therefore you need a shini on Yantif. However, not all dishes need spices. So there was not necessarily something you should have done. And therefore, you're allowed to grind it more on Yantif. That is one opinion. Another opinion says, spices lose their taste over time. And therefore, there's a reason you don't want to grind the spices before Yantif. So on Yantif, we're more liberal, we're more lenient, allowing you to grind those spices. But salt doesn't lose its taste at all. So why didn't you do it before Yantif? So therefore, we require you to do more of a shinoi on Yantif. And of course, in classical Gemara sense, asks the Gemara, what is the practical ramification between these two opinions of Rav Huna and Rav Chisda? Whether the reason is that salt doesn't lose its taste, or whether the reason is that all dishes need salt. Explains the Gemara, case number one is when you know what dish you're going to make. So if you know what dish you're going to make, so now, according to the second answer, that spices lose their taste, you still had no reason to do it before Yantif, even though you knew you're going to need it, but it loses its taste. But according to the first answer, since you knew you're going to need it, now you should have done it beforehand, and if you didn't, you're going to have more of a shinoi. Inami, teres number 2, bimarika with saffron. Saffron is similar to salt that does not lose its taste, and therefore, if you did not do that, you should have done it because you knew it wasn't going to lose its taste. So that's the machlekes Rav Huna and Rav Chisda. Why salt were more stringent, require more of a shinoi, either because you should have known you're going to need it, or the reason is that it doesn't lose its taste, which both of these are very important reasons, but very important details, which we're going to develop more today and tomorrow, which is going to start teaching us about the halachas of cooking in Yantif, the fact that if you could have done it beforehand, you should. The fact is, if it's going to lose its taste, you don't have to, and let's see more of this right now. Amar Rav Yehuda Mar Shmuel, says Rav Yehuda Mar Shmuel, a third opinion. We had Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel in the Mishnah with regard to spices versus salt crushing. Says Rav Yehuda Mar Shmuel, Kol ani daichen gedarkav afilu melech. Says Rav Yehuda Mar Shmuel, everything carte blanche, you have a heter to grind as much as you want your heart's content in Yantif. Asks the Gemara one second. But we said that salt requires a shinoi. How can you tell me that Rav Yehuda Mar Shmuel holds that salt does not need a shinoi? Answers the Gemara, he holds like a different Mishnah. It's true, in our Mishnah, everyone agreed that salt needs a deviation. But says Rav Yehuda Mar Shmuel, I have a different Mishnah. What's the Mishnah? Tani, we learned in our Beitzah, Beis Shammai Beis Hillel did not disagree that when it comes to grinding, you could grind it the normal way. And once you're grinding spices, you're allowed to also grind salt with it. So that is not a point of debate. That if you're grinding, you could throw the salt in free, no problem. What's the machlekes Beis Shammai Beis Hillel? The machlekes is, are you allowed to grind salt by itself? There's a new take on the machlekes Beis Shammai Beis Hillel, the understanding of Rameir, which is whom Rabbi Yehuda Mar Shmuel is going with. Says the Gemara, Beis Shammai says, Melech lepachu Beitzah bar litzli. Says Beis Shammai, when you grind up salt, you have to use an earthenware flask, or you have to use a wooden spoon. Litzli, when you do it for roasting, you're not allowed to grind up salt for cooking. Why not? Because it needs a large quantity of salt to kasher the meat, and that is not going to be allowed. Yet Beis Hillel comes along and he says, you're allowed to grind salt as much as you want. Literally, bichol davar with anything. Bichol davar sal gedaitach. You tell me you could grind salt with anything? 1 second. There's certainly certain things which are muksa. So why you tell me you can use anything? What, you could go to your street and get a rock and grind up salt with it? That's not allowed. It's muksa. Ela what did Beis Hillel mean? Lichol davar. You could grind up salt for any reasons, for your pot, for your cooking, for your kashering. There are no limitations of grinding up salt. And therefore says the Gemara, this is who Rabbi Yehuda Mar Shmuel is going to hold like. He's not going to explain our Mishnah like the way we started off explaining that everyone agrees that salt requires a deviation. He's going to explain slightly differently. He's going to explain that according to Beis Hillel, salt could do as much as you want. Says the Gemara, Amar le Rav Acha Bardula Libre. Rav Acha Bardula says to his son, Kidaichis, when you crush up salt and yantif, etzli etzluye v'dach. You use the mortar on the side, use it not in the normal way, use it on the side, and then crush. Do a shinoi like that. Rav Sheshes Shama Kol Bochna. Rav Sheshes heard the sound of a pestle of grinding on yantif. Amar, he said, this is for sure not my house. That grinding is not in my house. Says the Gemara. Why did Rav Sheshes say that? Because he told them you're not letting it grind normally. He heard them grinding normally, so he said it's not my house. Ask the Gemara, Rav Sheshes, you have such supersonic hearing. Maybe they put it on the side and they did it with a shinoi. But the fact that you heard them grinding, why are you so convinced they did it in the normal manner? Answers the Gemara. He heard it a clear sound. He heard that they were grinding normally. Ask the Gemara further. How do you know they were grinding salt? You heard them grinding shkayach. Maybe they're chopping up spices. Answers the Gemara. Fascinating. When you ground up spices, the different sound is a louder sound than salt. Therefore, Rav Sheshes was able to discern by the sound itself. Fascinating that they were grinding up salt in a normal manner, therefore he knew it wasn't his house. Tanu Rabbanan, says the Gemara, let's continue our theme. The Mishnah discussed grinding spices, grinding salt, do different machlekes, out to learn the machlekes Beis Shammai Beis Hillel. Now says the Gemara, Tanu Rabbanan. Ein oisim tisni vein koishin b'machteshes tarti. Says the Beitzah, you're not allowed to make tisni on Yantif. Din number 1 in the Beitzah. Din number 2 in the Beitzah, vein koishin b'machteshes. You cannot crush on a mortar. Tisni is a type of grits with wheat kernels. Split them into quarters. That's din number 1. And din number 2 is you're not allowed to crush with a mortar. Says the Gemara, tarti. Both of them? That's a contradiction. I read it wrong. One more time. You can't do that. Tarti, both of them, it's a contradiction. What's the contradiction? The first part of the Beitzah said, Eno is a tisni. Sounds like a specific issue with this dish called tisni. But then he told me you can't grind at all. So that's a contradiction. Which way is it? Answers the Gemara, this is what it means. The reason you're not allowed to make tisni is because you can't grind at all. Says the Gemara, so that's repetitive now. Let you just say, you should have said it very simply. Answers the Gemara, if it would have said that, Havamina would have thought on immediately. You would have thought that's a big one. To use a small mortar, I would think it's no problem. Kamash Malon, says the Beitzah, that you're not allowed to crush tisni, you're not allowed to use a machteshes, because the way to make tisni is a small grinder, and that's the way that it hones in and teaches us that you can't grind at all, neither large nor small grinder. Ask the Gemara, 3 lines to the bottom, but we learned in a Beitzah. We learned like the Havamina. We learned they only not let it grind with the large, we let it grind with the salt. So small, excuse me. Tanya says Abai, you're right. The first Beitzah was only discussing a large machteshes is a problem. But when it comes to tisni, that you cannot make at all. When it comes to drenal grinding, you can't do in the large one. Tisni, you can't even do in the small one. Teretz number 1 of Abaye. As we turn over to Yidal Mabez, Rabba Amar, a second teretz like Kasha, there's no question. Halon v'alahu. There's a fundamental difference, says Rava, between those in Eretz Yisrael and those in Bavel. Those in Bavel do not have servants, explains Rashi 2 lines from the top. And therefore, there's no concern that they're going to be mizalzel in this halacha. But those in Eretz Yisrael, they had servants, and therefore we're afraid that they're going to be mizalzel in the halacha. And that's the reason why you're not even allowed to crush in the small grinder, because the fear that the servants are going to take it too far. Rav Pabi, Mar Shmuel, isolate Daisa. He went to visit Mar Shmuel, they brought in front of him Daisa of Loyach, he didn't eat it. Says the Gemara, why didn't you eat it? Why didn't you eat it? You didn't eat it because you think they grounded it incorrectly. Maybe they did it in a small grinder. Answers the Gemara. He saw it was very fine, which he knew was meant it was in a large grinder. But how do you know? Maybe he made it before Yontif. He saw that it was white. Clearly it was fresh. He knew that the servants weren't such good guys, therefore that's why he was concerned. And he didn't eat these ground up grits on Yontif because he feared that they were ground up on Yontif itself. That is the malacha of Teichen on Yontif. And now we continue. with the malacha of Bayrer on Yontif. Ha Bayrer Kitnias be Yontif, says the Mishnah Yadalim Beis. So when that separates Ketinius, literally legumes on Yontif, you could separate the food and eat it. Do whatever you want in your lap the normal way. With the middle level specialized utensils. With the real bayra utensils. You can even soak it and then get rid of the chaff. Now, to point out, I said the real bayra utensils. It's really more accurate, the large bayra utensils. And that's really, as we pointed out, I think yesterday, that is an halach l'maisa, that when you have a bayra utensil, for example, you have a French press coffee maker, which according to most Paiskim on Shabbos is initial of bayr, aside from the problem of bishul. But on Yontif it's allowed, because that's a small quantity that's made for your cup of coffee, or 2-3 cups of coffee. You don't make that for a large time, for a large quantity. But if you have a bayr utensil that's made, perhaps a lettuce spinner according to some, that's made to do a lot of quantity, then maybe that's the type of bayr utensil that is forbidden on Yontif. Says the Gemara, Tani, we learned in a Beitzah, when is the Mishnah referring to Eichel Meruba al Absailes? The Machlekes in the Mishnah, when did Beitzah say that you take out the bad from the good, is only when there's more good than bad. Therefore, that's what you do during the week. Meaning, if I have more good than bad, I have a few pieces of crumbs in my soup, I have rocks in my meat, a few little rocks. Of course, I take out the bad during the week and I eat the good. That's when Beitzah said on Yontif you're allowed to do the same thing. Because on Yontif you're supposed to be memayit less in the tircha, whichever way is the easier way to do it. That's what you do on Yontif, which consequently will be the normal way of doing it during the week. If I have a little piece of fat, what do I do during the week? I shave off that piece of fat. On Yontif I'm allowed to do the same. I don't have to cut away the meat like I would do on Shabbos. But says Rav Gamliel, if I have a lot of psailas and a little bit of eichel, everyone agrees that even the normal way during the week, the less bothersome way, is taking away the food, and that's what you have to do on Yontif. So 1 second, if there's more psailas than eichel, does anyone say he's allowed? You can't do anything. The food, asks the Gemara, should become muksa, as Rashi points out. It should be forbidden, because it should be bottled, the food, and the whole thing should be moksa. Answers the Gemara, I don't necessarily mean in quantity. I don't mean that the whole thing is garbage with a little few pieces of meat. True, maybe that would be a problem. I mean in bother, that's what we're referring to. And that would be the halacha, that again, the basic halacha is that you do whatever is easier, which is what you would do during the week, to minimize the exertion you're doing on Yontif. Says the Gemara, Rav Gamliel Omer, Af Mediach V'Shayla, in the Mishnah, he said he could rinse and skim away all the husks. Tanya, we learned in a Beitzah, Rav Elazar, Rav Sadik Achai, Menagush, Al Beis Rav Gamliel, Shemevi and Deli Mali Adash, and they would bring a bucket filled with lentils, Umatzifin Leimayim, they would put water on the lentils, they would float the lentils, the lentils will float to the bottom, Upsailas and the garbage, Lamayla, and that would float to the top. And that's how they would skim off the bad stuff, and that's what you're allowed. But we learned the opposite. We learned that they would fill up the bucket with water, and the food would come to the top, and the bad would go to the bottom. Like two different types of garbage. If we're talking about earth, then it goes to the bottom. If you're talking about straw, then the straw flows to the top. But again, that is the heter of Rav Gamliel, that you're even going to be allowed to soak it in a bucket of water and separate it via the water and skim away the bad stuff. Says the Mishnah on Yedalim Beis, the second Mishnah of the Amud, Beishamei Oimrim in Mishalchem B'Yontiv al Elamanis. Says Beishamei, you're not allowed to give a present to your friend, Elamanis, only ready portions of food. Pesel Oimrim, Mishalchem Behema Chayev Ha'oif Ben Chayim, whether it's Lai Ben Shchutim, whether it's Shechtin, Mishalchem Yeinoi Shmanim Eslasais, wines, oils, and flowers, Vikidnias, and legumes of Lai Tvua, but not grains. Rav Shimon Matav Tvua, and Rav Shimon, allows you even to send grains to your friend on Yontif. Tani Rav Yechiel explains Rav Yechiel B'Vad. Says Rav Yechiel, you can't make a large party of gifting on Yontif, the reason being because that has the appearance that you're going to sell. It looks like you're going to market, Rashi explains, and therefore that's the reason why that is forbidden. Tanya, we learned in a Mishnah, Ein Shayra B'Chusa Mishleisha B'nei Adam, that you're not allowed what is a large party? No less than 3 people. By Ravashi, what do we have 3 people and 3 different presents, meaning each one person has 1 present. So can they all exchange gifts? Is that called a gift party that looks like buying and selling? And on that says the Gemara, Teku, we have to wait for Eliyahu and Avi for that answer. Rav Shimon Matir B'Tvua, Rav Shimon allows you even to give grains to your friends. Tani, we learned in a Beitzah. Rav Shimon Matir B'Tvua, Kigoin Chitin Lasses Men Ludiois. What are examples? It says the Gemara, wheat in order to make some sort of wheat dish. So Iron barley eaten lefnei behemta to give to the animal. Adashim, lentils, lasses men resisin to make a different type of lentil dish. That is the chiddush of Rav Shimon. They even allowed to give that on Yontif. And let's see one more Mishnah, the 3rd Mishnah of the Amud. It says the Mishnah, Meshalchin kelim bein tfurim bein shein tfurim. You're allowed to sing garments and Yontif, non-food items, whether they're sewn, whether they're not sewn. Va'af al pi sheyesh b'hem kalayim, which is a big chiddush. Why are you allowed to do that? We'll see in the Gemara. Even if they have kalayim, you're allowed to send it to your friend. Because they're for the Yontif. Whatever that means, we'll have to see if it's kalayim. What does that mean? It's for the Yontif. Avaloi sandal masumar, you're not allowed to send a sandal with spikes. Lo minol shein tofer, you're not allowed to send a shoe that's not sewn. Rav Yehuda Aimer, afle minol lava, not a white shoe. Because you need an uman, a craftsman, to dye it black. Zaklal says the Gemara, Kol shena usan by Yontif, mishalchan aisai. Whatever you're going to get benefit on Yontif, you're allowed to send. If you're not going to get benefit on Yontif, you're not allowed to send. We actually have a minute, so let's begin the Gemara. Says the Gemara, we said in the Mishnah you could send whether sewn or unsewn garments. I understand, you can wear them. What is an unsewn garment can be used for? Covering, it's a blanket. Why let us say kalayim to someone? What is kalayim useful for? How does that fit into the rule that has a useful on Yontif? Says the Gemara, if you're going to tell me you could use it for a cushion to sit on top of it. But you went to the Beitzah, you can't do that. You cannot go on top of the kalayim. But you're allowed to. I'm sorry. The kalayim should not be upon you, but you're allowed to put it underneath you. That's the oraisa. You're not allowed to put it underneath you. Can use it as your cushion. Why? Maybe one little thread of the kalayim will go onto your flesh, and that will be considered on you. Can he benefit from the kalayim? So that is forbidden. Says the Gemara. 1 second. So what is the case that you're sending kalayim on Yontif that you could get benefit from it? Perhaps you'll tell me, maybe you'll have the cushion, then you'll put something else, and then you'll sit on it. So there's no way that the kalayim could be on you because you have a separation. But we already know this one. From the great, the holy nation Yerushalayim, 10 mattresses, one on top of the other, the princess and the pea, and the bottom one is klayim, also you're not allowed to sleep on them. So what is the case that you're allowed to sing klayim on Yontif? You suggested maybe it's a cushion. It can't be a cushion because maybe a thread will come on you. Maybe you'll put a separation between the cushion and you. That's still not allowed. The princess and the pea, 10 mattresses. You have the pea on the bottom. You have the klayim on the bottom. You're not allowed to sit in any of those mattresses. Ella answers the Gemara. What's the case? The case is a curtain of klayim that is allowed because that's not considered something that you're wearing. Asks the Gemara, why are curtains potentially tamei makabel because the attendants warn themselves with it. Sometimes the attendants would wrap themselves with those vilain, with those curtains. It reminds us of those towels in the mirror that you see sometimes people wrapping themselves with. Says the Gemara. So we see that even a curtain, there are times that people wrap themselves with. So that can't be a case either. Moving along to tomorrow's daf of says Vavam and Aleph Elo. What's the case of kalayim, the Yolatis and the Yontif? Big kashin, stiff material, and therefore there's no concern. It does not give you any warmth. There's no concern that it's going to come on top of your body, and therefore you're allowed to sit on a stiff material of kalayim. And the Gemara proves this with Chiyadam Ravuna Breder of Yeshua. This stiff garment in Arish Sharia of the place called Narish is allowed to be used even though it's kalayim. Amar Baba Ardlin ein mishum kalayim. Ardlin undershoes have no issue of kalayim again because they're hard. Amarava hanusri depshiti coin bags which also are made of wool and linen mishum kalayim again because you don't wear them. Debarzini yesh mishum kalayim. But if it's of the debarzini, if it holds seeds, then it has an issue of Kalayim, the reason being because they used to put them on their lap, explains Rashi, and at some level it gave them warmth. Rav Ashi Amar, it's not a normal way to warm yourself. Those are the wonderful halachas of Kalayim. We learn a massive chiddush today. Maybe it's a chiddush that Kalayim you're not allowed to wear, you're not allowed to warm yourself with. You can't even sit on because it might come upon you. You can't use it as a curtain because you might wrap yourself up with it. But if it's a hard, stiff material, then you're allowed to sit on it. You're allowed to have your wallet made out of Kalayim. Some of them held that the seeds made of Kalayim you can't because you put on your lap. But even on that, Rav Ashi disagreed. We'll pick up for the 2 dots and finish the parak in Beitzah Hashem tomorrow.